Isabella Rose wasn't just the center of attention. She was the reason men forgot their wives, their vows, and their power. Just 29, she was the founder of one of New York's hottest luxury brands, invited to every elite party, followed by paparazzi and worshipped by men who ran empires. But it wasn't her wealth or her beauty that made her dangerous. It was her aura, bold, untouchable, and magnetic. She never walked, she glided, hips swaying like music only she could hear. Tonight, her heels tapped on the marble floors of Lunar Sky, Manhattan's newest rooftop obsession. Her dress? A black satin slid up to the thigh, barely holding her secrets. Her lips were blood red. Her eyes? Deadly. Every man in the room looked at her like a feast. She smiled, slow, seductive, and entirely in control. One by one they came. A tech billionaire tried to impress her with his private island. A senator whispered sweet nothings about yachts and policy. She played along, sipped her wine, and then, just as they thought they had her attention, she'd lean back and say, "I'm bored." Power was her game. And she always won. Until he arrived. He didn't belong. In a room full of suits and Rolexes, he wore a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled, lean jeans, and an untamed beard. No designer cologne. No gold chain. Just calm, dark eyes that watched her, not like a man begging for her touch, but like a man deciding if she was worth his. For the first time in years, Isabella's breath caught. He wasn't staring at her body. He wasn't impressed by her presence. He was analyzing her. Unmoved. Unbothered. Pissed her off and turned her on. She leaned toward the bar, closer to him, letting her perfume mix with the air between them. "You don't look like the usual type that ends up in a place like this," she teased. "I'm not here for the usual type," he replied, sipping his drink without looking away. Her smile faded just a little. That wasn't a compliment. It was a challenge. "And what makes you think I'm usual?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Because women who walk like queens usually hide the girl who's tired of pretending." Her heart skipped. He knew. He saw right through her perfect skin, flawless walk, fake smiles, and it terrified her. "What's your name?" she asked, voice low. "Liam." He didn't ask for hers. He just leaned in and said, "Penthouse suite. It's midnight. If you dare to stop pretending." At exactly 12:01 a.m., she stood outside his door. Not because she was desperate, but because something inside her was trembling. And Isabella never trembled. He opened the door shirtless, towel around his waist, hair damp, body cut like stone. No candles. No music. Just heat and silence. "I don't usually do this," she said. "You don't usually admit what you want," he replied, pulling her inside. The moment the door shut, she was in his arms. Lips collided. Hands explored. Every kiss was deeper, every touch demanding. He didn't ask. He took. And she let him. 'Cause for once, Isabella wasn't in charge. And she didn't want to be. Liam didn't kiss like the others. He kissed like he was claiming territory. Like he wasn't there to win her. He was there to undo her. Isabella had always been the one with control. Her fingers always guided the pace, her voice always directed the rhythm. But with Liam, her body answered to his hands, his mouth, his timing. He pinned her softly to the wall, the city lights glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. His fingers slid the strap of her dress off her shoulder, then slowly peeled the satin from her skin, like unwrapping a secret. "You're not nervous," he whispered in her ear, voice like warm smoke. "No," she lied. He smiled, brushing his lips down her neck, across her collarbone, down to the swell of her breasts. "You're trembling." His hand slipped between her thighs, a slow, firm touch, and her knees nearly gave out. Isabella gasped, eyes fluttering closed. Her heart thundered in her chest, her breath catching between moans. It wasn't just the pleasure. It was the loss of power. And somehow, that was the most arousing part. He picked her up like she weighed nothing, carried her to the bed, and laid her down slowly, never breaking eye contact. "No games," he said, kissing her lips softly, then harder. "No pretending." And for the first time in years, Isabella didn't pretend. She didn't fake her moans. Didn't control her movements. Didn't plan what came next. She surrendered, fully, completely, hungrily. Their bodies tangled in heat and sweat and tension. Every thrust hit deeper. Every breath came ragged. She screamed his name without shame, clutched his shoulders like he was the only man she'd ever known. It wasn't just sex. It was something that made her feel real again. Afterwards, the silence was almost louder than the pleasure. They lay in the dark, her head on his chest, his fingers running lazy circles along her spine. She should have gotten up, gotten dressed, left like she always did. But she couldn't move. Instead, she whispered, "Why didn't you call me by my name?" He looked at her for a long moment, then finally said, "Because I don't want the version the world knows. I want the woman underneath." She swallowed. Hard. That woman hadn't come out in a long time. He didn't press her for more. He just held her, and slowly she let herself be held. When she woke up, the bed was cold. Liam was gone. Only a note rested on the pillow beside her. "Don't chase me. You're not the one in control anymore." Her fingers clenched around the paper. Something burned in her chest, not anger, not confusion. Longing. She had dozens of men in her messages. DMs full of compliments, private invitations, gifts, power, tension. But none of them mattered, because the only man she couldn't own had already taken everything from her in just one night. Days passed, then weeks, and yet the feel of his hands still haunted her skin. Isabella tried to go back to her old ways. The dresses, the attention, the flirtations, but none of it worked anymore. Men no longer excited her, they annoyed her. Their lines felt cheap, their touches forgettable. She'd spent years building walls, controlling every interaction. Liam had broken them in one night and disappeared. Until one Friday evening, 2 weeks after that night, she saw him again. He was standing at the bar of a private art auction in Soho, sipping whiskey, dressed in a charcoal gray shirt, open at the collar, sleeves rolled. Same calm energy. Same maddening mystery. But this time, he didn't look at her. Not once. She watched him from across the room, heart pounding, legs frozen. How dare he ignore her? How dare he come back into her world like nothing happened? Fueled by a mix of rage and desire, she walked straight up to him and whispered, "You said not to chase you. So why are you here?" He turned slowly, eyes meeting hers, and smiled. "I wanted to see if you still thought you were in control." She stiffened. "I'm not playing your games." "But you came to me," he said, setting his glass down, brushing a hand along her bare arm. "And you're still trembling." She hated that he was right. He leaned in, voice brushing against her ear. "Come with me. One last night. Then you'll understand." Against all logic, she followed him. They didn't go to a hotel this time. They drove. Out of the city. Into the hills. To a quiet house overlooking a lake. Secluded, silent, lit only by the moon through tall windows. Kind of place where secrets hid in shadows. As soon as they stepped inside, he kissed her, fierce, hungry, like he needed her more than oxygen. Her heels came off, dress unzipped, breath stolen. He took her on the kitchen counter first, raw, hard, desperate. Then again on the stairs, slower this time, kissing every inch of her like she was both a sin and a salvation. And when they reached the bedroom, he didn't rush. He lit candles, ran a hot bath, picked her up, slid her in the water, and joined her. No talking, just hands under water, lips on wet skin, eyes locked. That night, he didn't just take her body. He undressed her soul. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms under silk sheets, she finally whispered, "Who are you really, Liam?" He stared at the ceiling, chest rising slowly. "I used to work for people who taught me how to manipulate, how to seduce, how to control." He paused. "But when my fiancé died in a car crash, I disappeared. I left that world. I disappeared from everyone." Silence. She turned to him, brushing her fingers over the scar on his shoulder. "And now, I only come back for what I can't stop thinking about." He looked at her. Deep. Intense. "You." Her throat tightened. "So, this isn't a game to you?" "No," he whispered. "It started as one. But then you showed me I wasn't the only one hiding." And just like that, Isabella realized something terrifying. She hadn't fallen for his body. She'd fallen for the man who saw the woman behind her mask. And she didn't want to lose him again. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting golden lines across the bed. Isabella stirred, wrapped in silk sheets and the scent of him. Liam lay beside her, arm draped over her waist, breath soft, peaceful. For a moment, she let herself pretend they were ordinary people. No secrets. No past. No power games. Just a man and a woman tangled in something real. But her mind couldn't rest. She slipped out of bed, wrapped his shirt around her body, and wandered to the living room. On a side table near the window sat an old box, wood engraved, unlocked. Curiosity tugged at her. She opened it slowly. Inside were photos. Liam in uniform. Liam holding hands with a woman on a beach. Her smile was wide. Her hair sun-kissed. She looked happy. Real. Then another photo, burned on one side, torn. The same woman. But this time in a car. The windshield cracked. Blood on her shoulder. Isabella's fingers froze. "You went through my things," his voice came from behind. She turned, startled, the guilt sharp on her face. "I'm sorry." Liam walked slowly toward her. No anger. Just something heavy in his eyes. "I kept them because I couldn't let go," he said, taking the photo gently from her hands. "But you made me want to try." Her voice was a whisper. "She was beautiful. She was everything," he replied, eyes misting. "But I wasn't the man she deserved. I thought if I could control everything, I could protect her. But life doesn't work like that." Isabella felt a strange ache in her chest. Because that's who she was too. Trying to control everything. Trying to protect herself from ever feeling pain again. "I never let anyone close," she admitted, voice cracking. "They all think I'm cold. Untouchable. But the truth is, I've just been terrified of being seen." Liam stepped closer. "But I see you." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "And I still want you," he said. "Not because you're powerful or beautiful or perfect, but because underneath all of that, you're the most human thing I've ever touched." Her breath caught. He reached into his pocket, not for a ring, not for a promise, but for his phone. He unlocked it, handed it to her. "One contact only. Yours. If you want it. No pressure. No chase. Choice." Isabella stared at the screen, then up at him. And for the first time in her life, she let herself smile, not the flirtatious, polished smile she gave the world, but the one that belonged only to her. "I don't want to own anyone anymore," she whispered. "I just want someone who chooses me back." He stepped forward, wrapped his arms around her and kissed her slowly, softly, like a promise, not a possession. Months later, she entered another high-profile event, different city, same spotlight. Men still turned. Women still stared. But Isabella didn't care. Because this time, her heart wasn't on the market. It was already claimed, not by force, not by seduction, but by the only man who ever broke her walls and stayed to rebuild what was underneath. Liam. And in that final moment, Isabella didn't own the room. She owned herself.